My name is Wren. I am 28 years old, and I have never once in my life spoken to my biological father. That is not a dramatic opening. That is just the plain shape of my life, the way some people might say, I grew up in Ohio, or I am the middle of 3 children. It is a fact I have lived inside, so completely that for a long time it did not feel like a wound. It felt like weather. Something you dressed for. Something that was simply there when you woke up. I want to tell you what happened 3 months ago, when a notification on a genealogy platform changed the arithmetic of my entire existence. But to understand what that notification meant, what it actually cost, and what it returned, you have to understand who I was before it arrived. And to understand that, I have to tell you about my mother and a letter, and a man named Gerald Voss who spent 28 years insisting I was not real. It was a Tuesday in October, when my mother told me the full story. I was 11 years old. She had come home from a double shift at 9:17 p.m., still in her scrubs, and she sat down at our kitchen table in Decatur, Illinois, and she looked at me the way people look at you when they have been waiting a long time to say something and have finally run out of reasons to wait. She told me that my father's name was Gerald, that he was an electrical engineer who worked for a mid-sized infrastructure consulting firm in the western suburbs of Chicago, that they had dated for 14 months, not casually, she was careful to say, not briefly, and that she had told him she was pregnant in March of 1997, 2 weeks before he ended things by not returning her calls. She said she had been 24 years old and working double shifts and not sleeping well, and she had not, at first, understood what his silence meant. She had assumed something had happened to him. She had called his office once and been told he was unavailable. She had written him 3 letters over the course of 7 weeks. The 3rd letter had been answered, not by him, but by a woman named Patricia, who identified herself as Gerald's wife. The word wife landed on my 11-year-old brain in a way I did not fully process until I was much older. Gerald had been married. For how long, my mother did not know exactly, but the marriage had clearly existed during the 14 months they were together, which meant that the whole shape of what my mother had believed she was part of was different from what it actually was. Patricia's letter was written in language that had clearly been reviewed by someone with legal training. It informed my mother that any further contact would be treated as harassment, that Gerald had never had a relationship with her beyond a brief professional acquaintance, and that the claims being made were entirely without basis. It used the word fabrication twice. It used the word pattern once, in a sentence that implied my mother was not the first person to make such a claim, which my mother believed then and believes now to be false, deployed purely for the purpose of making her feel small. My mother kept all 3 of her letters and Patricia's response in a shoebox at the top of her closet. She showed them to me that night. I sat at the kitchen table under the overhead light and read each one carefully while my mother made toast. Patricia's letter was typed on cream-colored stationery with a Naperville address printed at the top. I remember looking at the zip code and thinking that Naperville was only about 2.5 hours from Decatur, which felt both very far and very close. When I finished reading, I put the letters back in order, the way I had found them, and I asked my mother if she was okay. She said she had been okay for a long time. She said the hard part was not Gerald. The hard part was imagining telling me. I did not cry at the kitchen table that night. I do not fully understand why. I think I was in some form of information processing mode that precluded emotion, the way you can sometimes drive home from a difficult appointment and not feel anything until you are standing in your own kitchen holding your keys, and then suddenly feel all of it at once. The feeling came later, over weeks, in increments. But at the table I just sat and thought, with the particular clarity of an 11-year-old who has just been handed a fact that reorganizes everything. So he has always known about me and decided I was not worth knowing. I have spent 17 years returning to that sentence, testing it, turning it over, looking for a version of it that is less true. I have not found one. Before I tell you what happened when I turned 19, I want to ask you something. Tell me where you are right now and what the weather is like outside your window. Is it dark where you are? Is it the kind of evening where you've wrapped yourself in something warm, where the ordinary details of your life feel, just for a moment, like enough? I ask because what I am about to describe happened to me on a very ordinary afternoon, and I think sometimes that is the detail people forget, that the things that change your life do not announce themselves. They arrive in plain envelopes. They arrive on Wednesdays. I was 19 years old and 3 months into my second semester at the University of Illinois Springfield when the envelope arrived at my mother's address. She called me at 2:33 p.m. on a Wednesday in February, and I remember the call precisely because I was sitting in the campus library with a constitutional law textbook open in front of me, and I had just highlighted a passage about standing, the legal doctrine that requires you to prove you have been personally harmed before a court will hear your case. I have thought about that detail many times since. The irony of it is almost too neat to be true, but it is. She read me the letter over the phone. It was from a firm called Hadley, Crane & Wick in Naperville, Illinois. It was addressed to both of us by name. It informed us that Gerald Voss and Patricia Voss had become aware that a person claiming to be Mr. Voss's biological daughter had been making inquiries. I had done no such thing, but someone had apparently mentioned my existence to someone who mentioned it to someone else, the way these things travel in small professional circles after enough years, and that any attempt to contact Mr. Voss, his family, his employer, or his associates, or to make any public claim of biological relation, would result in immediate legal action. The letter named me by my full name, Wren Marie Ashe. It named my mother. It included a paragraph about defamation and another about tortious interference, both of which, I later learned, were largely inapplicable to the actual situation but were included, I suspect, for the same reason Patricia had used the word pattern in her 1997 letter, to make us feel that we were the problem. I sat in the library for several minutes after we hung up. A girl at the table across from me was eating a granola bar and laughing at something on her phone. I looked at the constitutional law textbook. I wrote the law firm's name, the date, and the case number printed on the letterhead at the top of a fresh page in my notebook. Then I finished the chapter one had been reading. My mother mailed me the original letter the following week. I added it to my own copy of the shoebox documents, which I had been keeping since the night she showed them to me at 11. I had added to the collection gradually over the years a printout of Gerald Voss's LinkedIn profile from 2009, listing his title as Senior Project Engineer, an article from a regional business journal that ran a brief feature on his firm receiving a state infrastructure contract in 2014, a copy of the firm's website showing his name in the leadership section. Nothing sinister. I was not building a case. I did not have a plan. I was just keeping things, the way some people keep ticket stubs or pressed flowers, as a form of proof that something real had occurred. I filed the cease and desist letter behind the others and went back to school and did not think about Gerald Voss again for a long time. I should tell you something about my mother because she is the architecture of everything that came next, even when she was not in the room. Her name is Sylvia Ashe. She was 24 years old when she had me, working as a radiology technician at Decatur Memorial Hospital, making $31,200 a year. She raised me alone from birth in a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of Decatur for which she paid $687 a month. She drove a 1994 Honda Civic until it had 211,000 miles on it. She packed my lunches every day through 8th grade. She came to every school event I ever had, every recital, every parent-teacher conference, every curriculum night, often straight from a shift, still in her work clothes, smelling faintly of the hospital, sitting in those small plastic chairs with a kind of focused attention that I did not fully appreciate until I was old enough to understand what it had cost her in energy and sleep. She did not take child support from Gerald Voss. This was a decision she made deliberately and has never second-guessed, though I asked her about it several times over the years. She told me, most clearly on a Sunday afternoon in November of 2019, when we were sitting in her car outside a Panera Bread in Springfield after a celebratory lunch for her promotion to lead radiology technologist. She had just been hired by a new imaging center at a salary of $58,400 a year, which felt to both of us like an enormous sum. She told me that accepting money from Gerald would have meant accepting contact with Gerald, and contact with Gerald meant contact with his lawyer, and she had read that cease and desist carefully enough to know that any financial arrangement would have come with conditions she was not willing to live inside. She wanted distance. She wanted a clean line. She wanted to raise a daughter who understood, from the first coherent thought onward, that her value was not contingent on being chosen by someone who had the option to walk away. I asked her that afternoon if she was angry. She thought about it the way she thinks about things, looking out the window at the parking lot, letting the silence be what it needed to be, not performing the absence of an answer, but actually searching for the accurate one.
She said no.
Not anymore. She said she had been angry for approximately 3 years after Patricia's first letter. She said the anger had been clean and useful, and then she had put it down. She said the only thing she had ever found genuinely difficult over all the years was the particular fact that Gerald had told people I did not exist. Not that he had left. She could carry his leaving, but that he had looked at people he knew, colleagues, family, friends at dinner parties, and said the words, "There is no daughter." That woman made up a story. Those were the exact words. She had learned them from a woman named Deborah Crane, a mutual acquaintance who had been at a dinner party in Naperville in the fall of 2003 and had heard Gerald say them when the subject of an old relationship came up in passing. Deborah had written my mother a letter about it in January of 2011, 14 years after the fact, apparently having carried the weight of knowing for a long time before deciding my mother deserved to know too. I have that letter. I have read it many times. It is written in a careful, apologetic hand on lined notepad paper, 3 pages, and it concludes with a sentence that has stayed with me. I don't know if this helps or hurts. I only know I wouldn't want someone to have said it about me, without anyone ever telling me. I was 14 years old in the fall of 2003. I was in the 8th grade in Decatur, Illinois. I was reading The Outsiders for English class and going through a phase of collecting gel pens in those multicolor packs and learning, on Sunday afternoons in empty parking lots, how to parallel park in my mother's Civic. I was, by any reasonable measure, a daughter. Gerald Voss sat at a dinner table in Naperville and told the people around him that I was a fabrication. I did not carry this as rage. I want to be precise about that because I think people expect rage in a story like this, and I understand why. Rage is clean, rage has edges, rage is easy to locate and describe. What I carried was something more diffuse and harder to name. It was the low-level dissonance of knowing that somewhere in the world there was a version of your existence that had been officially denied. It is not the same as grief. It is more like a permanent footnote, a small asterisk on the bottom of a page that only you can see. I finished college in May of 2021 with a degree in health informatics and a GPA of 3.87. I moved to Chicago that summer and accepted a position as a junior data analyst at a health technology company called Meridian Systems, starting salary $52,000. I was 23. I was efficient and careful, and I asked good questions, and I documented everything compulsively, a habit that had served me well in school and served me even better in a role that was essentially about finding errors in large data sets before those errors propagated into clinical decisions. By March of 2023, I had been promoted twice. First to data analyst 2 at $63,500, then to senior analyst at $74,500, and I had a small apartment in Pilsen with south-facing windows, a second-hand green velvet couch that I loved unreasonably, a cat named Provisional, and a quiet, ordinary life that was mine in a way that felt earned and solid and real. I was happy. I want to say that plainly because I think stories like this are often assumed to be about unhappy people, and I was not unhappy. I was building something. I was sleeping well most nights. I had good friends and a job I found genuinely interesting and a neighborhood I liked walking through on Sunday mornings. I was not waiting. I was not watching the door. I had folded the asterisk into the rest of the page and moved on. The genealogy kit was not about him. I want to be absolutely clear about that because I know how it reads and I know what people will assume. A woman with a missing father submits a DNA test. The father's family turns up. It sounds designed. It was not designed. It was a Thursday afternoon in August of 2024, and Meridian Systems had rolled out a voluntary employee wellness initiative in partnership with a genomic health company called Helix. Participating employees received a subsidized DNA kit as part of their annual benefits enrollment. The stated purpose was to surface hereditary health risk factors that could inform preventive care. I enrolled because I had a documented family medical history on my mother's side, a grandfather with early-onset cardiac disease, an aunt with a BRCA variant, and a complete blank on my father's side, and blank pages in medical histories are not simply inconvenient. They are clinically relevant. They represent risk that cannot be assessed because the information does not exist. I swabbed the inside of my cheek on a Wednesday evening in August. I dropped the kit in the mail on Thursday morning. I did not think about Gerald Voss. I thought about whether hereditary lipid panel abnormalities were something I should discuss with my primary care physician at my next appointment. The results came back 6 weeks later, on a Thursday morning in late September. I was at my desk at Meridian at 8:51 a.m., eating a yogurt and annotating a data migration report when the email notification arrived. I opened the Helix app on my phone during a short break. The health markers were, as I had hoped, largely unremarkable. Slightly elevated genetic indicators for certain lipid metabolism variants. Worth noting, worth monitoring, not alarming. I scrolled through the ancestry composition section with mild interest. 62% Northern and Western European. 18% Ashkenazi Jewish, which I had not known and which made me sit with a small, wordless feeling for a moment. A scatter of smaller regional percentages. And then, at the bottom of the relative matches panel, a section I had not particularly thought about, had not sought out, had not considered the implications of a match. The username was GV_genealogy_1967. The platform's predicted relationship label read, close family, half sibling. Shared DNA percentage, 47.3%. I put my phone face down on my desk. I sat for a moment looking at my monitor. I picked the phone back up. The match's profile was largely public. He had configured his settings to display relative matches and had not restricted visibility. His display name, listed in the account details, Thomas Voss. Age, 31. Location, Naperville, Illinois. He had joined the platform 18 months earlier and had uploaded a family tree that extended back 4 generations on both sides. A careful, thorough piece of work, the kind of project a methodical person undertakes on weekends over a period of years. Thomas Voss was 3 years older than me, which meant he had been born in 1993, which meant that when Gerald Voss was building a relationship with my mother between 1995 and 1997, his son Thomas was already 3 years old. Patricia was already his wife, and Gerald had been, simultaneously, telling my mother a different story. I sat at my desk for a long time. I finished my yogurt. I submitted the data migration report by 10:15 a.m. I answered 4 emails. At 11:47 a.m. I took the elevator to the ground floor and stepped outside onto West Monroe Street and stood on the sidewalk and let the September air move over me and tried to locate what I was feeling, which was not rage and not grief and not, precisely, shock. It was something closer to the sensation of a very long equation finally resolving. The kind of moment where you realize you have been holding a variable as unknown for so long that you had forgotten it was ever a variable at all. Something inside me went very still. Not cold. Not hard. Still. The way a room goes still in the moment after a door has been opened and before anyone has decided what to say. I called my mother at 12:03 p.m. I told her what I had found, as precisely as I could. The username, the percentage, the name, the age, the location. She was quiet for long enough that I checked to make sure the call had not dropped. Then she said, very calmly, in the voice she uses when she has already processed something faster than the conversation has caught up to, well, I suppose that is that. I did not contact Thomas Voss. I want to be precise about this because it matters to the shape of what followed. I changed nothing about my profile. I sent no messages. I did not adjust my visibility settings in any direction. My Helix profile listed my first name and my general metro area. I had not gone looking for him. The platform had looked at 2 sets of chromosomes and reported what was true. Thomas Voss contacted me 9 days later, at 6:22 p.m. on a Friday evening in early October. I was home on my green velvet couch with provisional sleep across my ankles. The Helix notification appeared on my phone while I was watching something on my laptop that I cannot now remember. His message said, "Hi. I know this is strange, and I don't really know how to begin. I've been sitting with this match for over a week. I looked into it as thoroughly as I could before reaching out. I think we might be related in a way I was not aware of. I would like to talk if you're open to it. I understand completely if you're not." I read the message 4 times. I set my phone face down on the cushion beside me and looked at the ceiling for a while. Provisional shifted on my ankles. Outside, the neighborhood made its ordinary Friday evening sounds. I thought about the shoebox. I thought about the letter on cream stationery. I thought about Deborah Crane's 3 pages of careful handwriting. I thought about my mother saying, in a parking lot in 2019, that the anger had been clean and useful, and then she had put it down. I picked up my phone. I typed, "Yes, we can talk." And I sent him my number. He called at 8:47 p.m. that same evening. We talked for 1 hour and 53 minutes. His voice was measured and deliberate, the voice of someone choosing each word with care. He told me he had grown up believing he was an only child. He told me that when the match appeared, he had initially assumed a platform error and had contacted Helix's customer support team, who confirmed that a 47.3% shared DNA result was not a processing error and was consistent with a full half-sibling relationship. He told me he had then consulted a genetic counselor, Dr. Felicia Osei at Northwestern Medicine, whom he saw on October 14th, who explained in clinical terms exactly what the percentage meant and could not, under any legitimate interpretation, mean anything other than what it said. He told me he had brought all of this to his parents on a Sunday afternoon, documentation in hand. He said, "I asked my father directly. I put the match in front of him. I said, 'Do you know who this person is?' There was a pause on the line. He said, 'My dad told me you weren't real.' He said his father had looked at the Helix result, at the 47.3%, at my first name, and had said, 'The platform makes errors, Thomas.' That woman," and here Thomas's voice changed very slightly at the edges, tightened almost imperceptibly. "That woman made up a story a long time ago. There is no daughter. There are no words adequate to the experience of hearing a sentence you have never directly heard and recognizing it with your entire body." I had never been in the same room as Gerald Voss. I had never heard his voice before that call. But those words had been part of the climate of my life since 2011, since Deborah's letter, and hearing them again, the same construction, the same phrasing, used again in 2024 to his own son, to a genetic counselor's documented findings, was not a surprise. It was a confirmation, the kind that settles something rather than shatters it. I said, very quietly, "I know. He has been saying that for 28 years. Thomas was silent for a moment. Then, "How long have you known about him?" I said, "My whole life." What followed unfolded the way real consequences tend to, not in 1 hour, but across 3 weeks of ordinary days that accumulated into something permanent. Thomas did not let the matter rest. He is, as I said, an engineer, and he approached the situation the way engineers approach structural problems, systematically, thoroughly, without shortcuts. He requested a second independent DNA analysis through a separate platform, which confirmed the half-sibling relationship. He had a second consultation with Dr. Osei on October 21st. He gathered the documentation into a folder the way I had been gathering documents into a shoebox for 17 years, and he returned to his parents on a Sunday afternoon in late October, folder in hand. He described that conversation to me afterward, in a call that lasted nearly 2 hours. He said his mother had gone pale and very still. He said his father had cycled through the error argument, then the contamination argument, then a version of events so structurally implausible that Thomas had stood up and walked out of the room while Gerald was still constructing it. Gerald Voss called my mother's number at 7:14 p.m. on October 28, 2024. My mother, who had kept the same phone number for 21 years, did not answer. She let it ring 5 times. Then she forwarded the missed call notification to me with a single text message. It was him. "I have saved the voicemail. Do you want it?" I said yes. She sent the audio file that evening. His voice was lower than I had imagined. Measured. Careful in the particular way of a person who is not accustomed to needing things from people who have no obligation to provide them. He said he thought it might be worth having a conversation. He said he hoped there were no hard feelings. He said, and I have listened to this part more than once, not from anger, but from something closer to quiet astonishment, that he felt there might be an opportunity to move forward in a way that worked for everyone involved. 47 missed calls came to my mother's number over the 11 days that followed. 17 came to mind, through a number I had never given Gerald Voss. Patricia called once on November 4th at 10:30 a.m. and left a voicemail in which she said Gerald was very sorry, that things had been complicated, that family was important, and that she had always. Her voice shifted here, softened into something that was trying to be sincere. She had always wondered. I did not return any of them. On November 8, 2024, at 8:03 a.m. on a Friday morning, I sent a single email to Gerald Voss's professional address. For sentences, it said, I received your calls. I am not interested in a relationship, and I want to be clear that this is a decision I have made with full information and without anger. I have no rage toward you. I think you are waiting for rage, and I want to be honest with you that I don't have any to offer. The DNA results have always been true, and I believe, somewhere, you have always known that. Then I closed my laptop and went to work. I reviewed a pipeline report. I ate lunch at my desk. I took Provisional to the vet for his annual checkup at 4:45 p.m. The world continued at its ordinary pace. That is the part of these stories that is hardest to convey, how thoroughly ordinary the day is on which you finally close a door you have been standing in front of your entire life. Gerald Voss replied 6 days later. The reply was long. I read it once, carefully, and I will not tell you everything it contained, because some things belong only to the person they were sent to. I will tell you that it included an acknowledgement, not an apology with any real structure to it, not a reckoning, but a sentence in which he conceded, in the careful, hedged language of a man who has spent nearly 3 decades practicing denial, that he had known. That he had always known. I forwarded it to my mother that evening. She read it and called me. She did not cry.
She said, well.
That took a while. Thomas and I still talk. Not often, and not yet with the ease of people who grew up together, but with the careful warmth of 2 people who share something real and are still learning what to do with it. We have met twice in person, once for coffee in Wicker Park in November, once for a walk along the lakefront in early January where he brought his dog and I told him about Provisional, and we talked mostly about our jobs and our neighborhoods and the particular fatigue of being in your late 20s in a city that costs too much to live in and too much to leave. We did not talk about Gerald very much. We talked like 2 people who are deciding, slowly and without pressure, whether they would like to know each other. I think they would. I think we would. I am in no hurry. Some doors do not require you to force them. They only require you to still be standing in front of them when the person on the other side has finally exhausted the energy it takes to hold them shut. I think about my mother at 24, working double shifts, packing my lunches, driving me to school in a car with 211,000 miles on it, keeping every letter in a shoebox at the top of her closet. Not as a weapon. Not in anticipation of a moment. Just keeping the record clean, the way you keep a record when you know what happened and you refuse to let the version told by someone with more power become the only version that exists. There is a principle in health informatics called data provenance, the idea that the integrity of any data set depends entirely on being able to trace where the information came from, how it moved, who handled it, and whether anything was ever altered. I have thought about this since October in relation to my own history. My mother kept every letter. I kept every document. We added nothing. We changed nothing. We simply maintained the record, for as long as it took, until someone else's data told the truth that ours had always been telling. I am 28 years old. I have a good job and a green velvet couch and a cat named Provisional and a brother I am still getting to know. I have Gerald Voss's voicemail saved in a folder on my phone. I do not listen to it often. I keep it the way I keep everything, not as a weapon, not as a wound, but as evidence. Evidence that it happened. Evidence that I was always real. If you were in Wren's place, 47 missed calls sitting unanswered and that voicemail in your phone, would you have sent the 4-sentence email and closed the door quietly, the way she did? Or would you have picked up the phone and made him say it out loud in real time, directly to you? There is something worth understanding about genealogical DNA evidence and the legal landscape in the United States. In most states, a documented DNA match at 47% or higher is admissible as supporting evidence in civil paternity proceedings, and the statute of limitations on establishing legal paternity for purposes of inheritance, medical history access, And insurance rights vary significantly by state and by the age of the child at the time of filing. If you are navigating a situation involving biological family recognition and legal identity, a consultation with a family law attorney who specializes in paternity matters is worth your time. Many offer free initial consultations and can clarify your rights within your specific jurisdiction. This channel does not provide legal advice. All stories are shared for entertainment and reflection only.